Welcome to Common Grounds, recorded inside the roasting room at the Coffee Roaster in Lincoln, Nebraska. In each episode, we sit down with people from Lincoln and beyond so you can get to know the fascinating individuals who help shape our community. Grab a cup and join us. We're glad you're here. There are people in this town that have touched lives of people literally all over the country. And there are people in this town that have taught people who now work in broadcasting all over the country. And Marilyn Moore and I are happy to be here with one of these folks. And his name is Richard Alloway, or I call him Rick. And he has been a professor at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, for oodles and gobs of years. And catching you, I guess this is kind of your retirement gig. Come and talk to Randy and Marilyn.
It's my swan song coffee.
Your swan song coffee. And but anyway, Rick Alloway is here with us today, and he's going to talk with us, first of all, about this coffee cup, which everything I brew for you. Mm-hmm. Oh, is that corny or what? But no, tell us about that cup.
This is actually not my cup. I've got dozens of mugs, as anyone who works in the broadcast industry and education accrues over the course of the decades. But this is a mug I got for my wife, and it's my favorite one in our collection because this is what I do every morning at our house. For as long as I can remember, I am the one who makes coffee for the both of us in the morning, and then serves her coffee. So I saw this mug at a local retail store, and I thought that just encapsulates what I like to do first thing in the morning, is share a morning cup of coffee deliciousness with my wife and take it to her. She's had some health issues the last year and a half or so this has become even more special for us to have time together in the morning.
So you take it to her?
Yeah.
Oh, you're setting a bad example for me. Because
I hope Jan is listening.
My wife has to come out and get her own coffee. Well, but I do make it.
This ties into the fact that I'm an adopted kid, but my adoptive family's heritage is Scottish, and I have learned a number of Scottish phrases over the years. Fun things like, I don't remember any of them right now, but the one I do remember that ties into this is cattywampus was the one I was trying to think of. People say my office is always cattywampus. But another one that we learned a couple of years ago is hurkle-durkle, which is a Scottish term that means you're spending a little more time in bed in the morning than you probably should. You should get up and get on with your day, but you're enjoying your time.
Would you spell that for me? I'm going to use that on my wife. I can't spell it. It's just hurkle-durkle. You can spell it however you want to. I'm sure if you just Google the first part of it, it'll pop up. But so we like to, when we can, I'll bring coffee up to bed, and we'll sit and talk about the events of the night on our phones or whatever else strikes our fancy, or cuddle with our cats, and just enjoy a more relaxed start to the morning. And now that I am transitioning to retirement in July from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, I hope to have more mornings to hurkle-durkle, and I'll bring coffee up regardless. Hurkle-durkle.
So that's why this mug means a lot to me, because I greatly value spending my time in the morning with Shelley.
It's a very tender story.
Now, there was a time when you had to get up and turn the radio station on early. So tell us about that.
Well, I started radio has been most of my, at least audio production in radio, been most of my life. I started in radio when I was in high school through a program that the Scouts in town had called the Explorer Program, which was a career development program that the Scouts ran for a long time for high school students. KFOR radio here in town had an Explorer post, and I got an opportunity in my junior year at Lincoln Southeast to go to a meeting and see if I liked it. And so, as I sort of candidly said, I went to one meeting and stayed for 12 years. So I ended up working. Yes, I ended up working for KFOR as a part-timer during my senior year and all the way through college, and then had a job waiting for me when I graduated from the university in 1977 as a creative writer and producer in their production department. Went on to become operations manager for 3 years. And so I had the radio on all the time, monitoring what was going on and what was happening in life. Got out of the radio business for a couple of years and went over to work for Rich Bailey and Jim Lauerman at what was then Bailey Lewis, now Bailey Lauerman, and had a fabulous time there. But the university came calling and said, we have this opening for a full-time manager to run KRNU FM, which is the university's student-run radio station, which I had been on as a kid. And that seemed very appealing to me. So I applied. And fortunately, no one better qualified than myself applied at that same time. So I got hired. That's where I met you. You were an adjunct professor for us at that time. But yes, we used to in those days sign the station on at 6 in the morning and sign it off at midnight at night. And so I had many a morning of being awake at 5:45, making sure our student workers got there on time and got the station signed on.
I had a sign-on shift when I was in college, living in a fraternity house. And this is not an interview with Randy, so I needn't go on that, except I slept in a room full of fraternity brothers, and I had 3 alarm clocks to wake me up at 4 so I could get to the station at 5 and sign on. And there were times when I didn't quite make it.
I understand that.
What was the backup plan if the student wasn't there? Were
Me.
you the backup plan?
Yeah, these were the days before broadcast automation was much of a thing, and we were all human driven. And so if a student didn't show up, we just got on the air late until I could get either another student worker to get there, or I drove the 10 minutes from my house down to campus and signed it on myself. So the school year wasn't as much of a problem because we always had student workers who lived on campus. Sure. And if one of them didn't show, I could wake somebody else up who was in a dorm 2 minutes away and get them to come over. Summer was a little more challenging because we stay on all year round. And when we were doing live shifts, having to staff the station every day during the summer got to be a bit taxing. But automation has taken care of that.
So 6 to midnight.
During the school year. Yeah. During the summer, we cut back to 9 to 9 a.m. to 9 p.m.
Still, that's a lot of hours to cover.
It is. And automation does that beautifully for us now, though I am not a fan of automation from the standpoint that there's a lack of human interaction there.
I agree with that.
That statistically, evidence shows people miss having a live announcer on the air and someone that they feel like they have a relationship with, and it's listening to an old friend. It's the discussion we're having right now. Even if it's no one you've ever met, the best on-air performers can make you feel as though that you are listening to your neighbor from over the back fence.
So you've taught. Have you counted how many students you've taught over the years? And
no, it's been 40 years of full-time teaching, but then I also was an adjunct in the interim years between leaving KFOR and going to the university. And I was actually adjuncting while I was still at KFOR. So I started teaching grading newscasts for Bob McMullen on the broadcast faculty, and then gradually took over teaching the sports broadcasting course because I could do that in the evening and not interfere with my job at the ad agency. So I've probably been teaching closer to 50 years than 40, but 40 officially full-time on the faculty. But been a lot of students have come and gone through the doors.
Were your students on the radio, were they all broadcasting majors?
In the early days, yes, but the radio station technically is licensed to the university, not to our college. And so I, over the course of years, tried to broaden it out to let any of the other majors that wanted to come in and work on the station. And now I don't even know the majors of the students that are on. If a student in history wanted to come over and do a show, we'd let them. So it's, and not all the broadcasting majors want to be on camera or on-air people. So it was nice to be able to broaden it out to any of our 4 majors that we have, plus anybody else on campus that wanted to, including faculty and staff.
I think that would be kind of a cool opportunity. And at the same time, I think it would be absolutely terrifying to know that it's like, it's me and the mic, and oh my gosh, do I have anything to say?
Yeah. And if you ever get past the point where it's not a little bit terrifying, that's when you're in trouble, because that's when you mess up.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about having a few butterflies before you go in
It's
to
like a
keep
little
you on your
stage fright
toes.
before you go on stage.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So you can share a name if you want, or just be nameless. Tell me about somebody that you helped get into the broadcast industry that's done extremely well.
Well, the problem with that is that there's no one for whom I can take complete credit. You know, it is truly the village that raises the student up. I've had the opportunity to interface with students through classes in many occasions who've gone on to do things that we're all very proud of. Not always names you'd recognize from on air. So we have an alum who has finished up their term as the head of both Minnesota Public Radio and Public Radio International, who was a student in one of my classes. We have right now a nationally recognized play-by-play announcer for Fox and for the NFL, who started out doing Westwood One World Series games and is now one of the most respected national play-by-play people out there. We have a host of a game show that is now one of the shows replacing Stephen Colbert in the new late-night CBS lineup. A young man, I will mention his name, John Kelly, who played for Coach Osborne all the time he was at Nebraska, but knew he wanted to be an on-air personality and did that for many years, both in radio and TV, in Kansas City and then Chicago. But for the last several years, he's been hosting a syndicated game show, which is now the second half of the hour or so that Colbert was doing late night on CBS. So we have a network television personality. But we also have a student, an alum, who hosts the 6 and 10 o'clock, or probably actually 6 and 11 o'clock in New York, newscast for the CBS owned and operated affiliate in New York City, and lots of other folks like that are just, it's fun to follow their careers. But a lot of them have gone on to do things out of the business too, but they are still plying those same trades that and skills that they learned in our college, but in perhaps not traditional, media or broadcast kinds of positions. Because one of the nice things about our education is that being a true liberal arts program, you're learning something about a lot of things, and those are all transferable skills then to so many other kinds of careers. Storytelling is ubiquitous to every industry. Yeah. So we have a lot of folks applying those skills they learned in our business, but for governmental agencies, teaching, whatever it might be along the line, if they're productive and they're happy in their jobs, then I consider my job to have been successful.
Well, almost every field has a communications department, so those skills work everywhere.
Yes, they do. Yep. Yeah. And I'm pleased to see the number of them that have now followed in my footsteps and are teaching. That's a special spot in my heart for those folks. And then I have a growing number of students for whom I was the faculty member for their parents. So that's kind of a special instance when somebody comes in and says, "Hey, my 18-year-old is coming to school, and they'll have you in school now." And I say, "Okay, I'll go for my walker over here." But that's been a real treat as well.
So you talked about being at KFOR here in Lincoln, and you and I can both, well, all three of us can remember the days when AM radio, you had it in your car, you had it in your kitchen, you had it in your bedroom, almost everywhere you went, you had an AM radio.
Yep.
And how has, I don't have a good question formulated, but I know radio has changed dramatically as has television, but talk a little bit about that.
I think
Does that concern you?
Well, yes and no. From a standpoint of listenership, AM radio has taken some pretty severe hits here over the last couple of decades. That started with the ascension of FM and FM stereo as listeners began to discern, boy, this FM stereo music sounds pretty much like the stereo system in my home. And AM, by comparison, sounds tinny and strained, and where most of us grew up listening to top 40 radio on AM, and the fabulous on-air personalities that a lot of the AM stations had, I grew up listening to KLMS here in town, and KLMS was a thriving top 40 AM giant for decades. And when I got into the business, I considered it a great honor to become colleagues with a lot of those folks at the other stations, still social media friends with a lot of them. KLMS had a terrific on-air staff for years and years and years. And I don't know that people growing up in Lincoln knew quite how good a station it was. But when FM came along and they eventually joined forces with KFMQ, the music started to gradually make more shifts over to FM. And when I was at KFOR, one of the things that came along that was the savior for AM for a long time was talk radio. And NBC kind of led the way with that, the NBC network. And then other stations began to pick up that, wow, this might have some legs on it. And so AM became primarily a news and talk format where the fidelity of the audio was not as important. But then mobile phones came along and the internet came along, and more things to listen to, more convenient ways to listen to it. And radio had much more competition than it had had before. It continues to. There is currently a bill before Congress to still mandate that all cars manufactured have an AM radio. Some folks think that's a bit of a Hail Mary life support system to keep AM stations alive. Others say, no, AM's reception goes farther. And for a public service standpoint, for critical information on weather or national emergencies, AM still has a vital role to play. So, yes, it's changed a lot. If you ask our 18-year-olds who come into the college, as I do or did, I get to keep using past tense now in all my classes, how many of you listen to a traditional broadcast radio station from a transmitter to a receiver? Out of 40 students, I might get 3 hands that go up.
Most of them listen on smart speakers.
But they listen, somewhere. But I say, how many of you listen to audio? Every single one of them.
Yeah.
So they're listening on their mobile devices or their smart speakers at home, their earbuds. The phenomenon I can't get used to is having one earbud in and not the other. So you can be listening to your class or somebody else while you're listening to another. I can't multitask audibly that way.
My brain can't do that.
No.
Cannot do that.
So radio has faced a greater number of competitive challenges over the years, but AM in particular faces a crisis of its listenership dying off. I had coffee with the group manager for one of the AM stations in town, I won't mention which one, several years ago, and said, what's your core audience age? And they were candid enough and said, our average listener age is 75. Yeah. And for any business, that's not sustainable. So you're seeing stations try more and more and more to attract younger audiences back in. I don't know how successful that will be with over-the-air signals. I think it's why you've seen KLMS go dark here in town. The signal just went away. WOW did in Omaha. There's an attempt being made to bring that back, as I understand it. But AM frequencies are just shutting down because they don't have the audience draw to keep them profitable.
I can remember, I grew up in southern Indiana, and I can remember listening to stations in Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
And St. Louis, and sometimes Atlanta. And, I'd sit here and you and I could have a contest of call letters that we can remember from the 50,000 watt stations. But,
sure.
That's all changed. I want to talk too about you are just retiring from the university's College of Journalism and Mass Communications.
Yeah, I probably didn't do a thorough enough explanation of what I've been doing for the last 40 years. But yeah, I'm teaching at the university and the College of Journalism and Mass Communications, teaching broadcasting courses and then managing the student radio station.
Well, we've talked about AM radio, but journalism touches AM radio,
sure,
and FM and television news and what we used to call print news. How's that changed? I know that's not your particular area of expertise, but how are you seeing journalism change and the importance of it?
Well, yeah, very different things there. I'll answer the second part of it first, which is to say there's never been a more important time for journalism than there is right now. because the growth of the internet has the good news and the bad news of the internet was contained in the same sentence, which is anybody can be an editor.
Yeah.
On the one hand, that freed you up from having to work through the traditional gatekeepers of news directors and newspaper editors. You could go directly to your audience, which is what FDR did with the fireside chats back, in his time, bypassing traditional media and speaking directly to the people. Very powerful. But it also means there's no fact-checking necessarily. There's no context being added to it. It's just anybody can throw stuff out there. And with the proliferation of bots and AI-generated material now, the need for some sort of moderated, someone's looking at this before it gets out to the general public kind of content has never been greater. I have just been forcing myself to pay no attention to comments. When I look at my social streams, I just have to look for a headline and then try to go to one of the sources that I still trust and see if I can second source it, because the ability to spoof people has become so good now with AI and fake accounts and everything else that who knows if what you're reading is remotely factual. And decisions are made on those erroneous kinds of things being thrown out there. I don't like seeing government run that way. I don't like seeing people making their own individual decisions based on that kind of material. So, yes, there's never been a greater need for skilled, thoughtful, fair journalists than right now.
And so how does a professional journalist play in that arena?
That's a challenging question. Jeff Zeleny from CNN, senior White House correspondent, is one of our alums and has been very gracious with his time and coming back to the college and offering to be part of dean's advisory committees and such. And we had a really good conversation the last time he was in town. And I said, in watching CNN's reporters and others get berated from the Oval Office and from the press room on just a daily basis, how do you keep going without rising to the bait on some of that? And he said, well, that's what they want. And so you just have to put that out of your mind and ignore it and just continue to ask the important questions as best you can and hope that eventually you'll get an answer. But the DC journalists in particular have become very adept at working other sources and understanding that the main news gaggle is going to be limited to primarily what plays well on television and in sound bites and in clips on the web, so that the greater in-depth interviews have to be done behind the scenes, which has always been true. Sure. It plays an even more important role now. But Jeff said we just have to laugh it off and know that this is political theater, and it's not personal. It's political theater, and we move on.
How does that get heard, though? How do I, as a consumer, how does that professional voice reach me as a consumer, as opposed to the 1,000 bots that are also trying to reach me as a consumer?
Yep, and I think it boils down to still looking for. The term mainstream media gets thrown around a lot, and there have been gross errors in judgment made by mainstream media outlets too. They're human beings. They take the bait once in a while and don't do their due diligence. But I think if you weed out to your own satisfaction, it takes some time in the early going to sift through sources for whom you can find second sourcing or third sourcing saying the same thing, that you begin to trust those sources. Then once you've established your little cohort of those, you can focus more on that and just not pay attention to the braying going on from, as a friend of mine likes to say, the ditches. Stay on the road and stay out of the ditches.
It's a great metaphor.
And that you'll probably, for the most part, be okay. Not to say the major media outlets don't make mistakes, but one of the hallmarks of a good media outlet is when they admit they've made a mistake and say, we got it wrong yesterday, and so in the interest of fairness, here's what this person actually said. Or I love the corrections that are so into the weeds that you think, I didn't need to know that. But they're just saying, we have to be entirely factual. His middle initial is L, not J. Okay. That makes me believe them a little more the
That's
next
really
time I see it.
That's just a plus in the credibility column when you see that.
Yep. I've had some in-depth discussions, and I won't go into names again, but a while back there was I lamented, and you and I have talked about this, Randy, I lamented the demise of the CBS radio network.
Yeah.
Because that was the first of the audio services that, in my way of thinking, wrote the vocabulary of how we tell stories through audio. And some of the greatest names in audio journalism were there. Douglas Edwards, Edward R. Murrow, people like that were on site. I mean, I still played examples in my classes of Murrow's reporting from London that, given the time shift over there, people were hearing that in their dinner hour over here of what was happening during the blackouts and the bombing raids. And he put them on the scene just with the depth of his knowledge of what was happening and with his articulate discussion of it. So to see the CBS radio network go away because the audience isn't there for it that used to be there, that was like a death in the family to me. And I wrote about it, and a good friend of mine whose opinions I value very greatly said, well, but I hear a lot of braying about the old line media going away, and it's because there's not an audience for them. And I said, I fully get that. Two things can be right at the same time. The audience is not there that used to be, but I can still lament the loss of what was a legacy reporting tradition. So what has to fill that void then is each of us taking some time to select and moderate our own list of sources that we value and that we trust, and that hopefully will also not only just be in our own little echo chamber, but will be sources that we may not agree with all the time, but that will give us a complete view of the source of the material that's going on out there. When I started at the university, Will Norton was my second dean. Neil Koppel, who founded the college, was our first dean. Will joined us in 1990, and he introduced me to some European publications that I had not ever read before. But he said, I think you'll enjoy the perspective of somebody who doesn't live in the country. And I don't know that enjoy was the right word. I was frustrated by some of the reporting. I was angered by some of the reporting, but I couldn't discount it as being incorrect. So I think to force yourself to read some opinions that challenge yours is valuable too, so that if you find, I've told students this for a long time, if you find that what those sources are saying to you validates your own belief, then you are stronger in knowing that your beliefs are probably where you want them to be. If not, you need to re-examine your own beliefs in the light of other opinions and say, maybe I got this one wrong. And I think that's part of being an American and being part of the American experiment too, don't you think?
And I think that is that's a lesson, or that's an experience that is far broader than limited just to journalists. I mean, that's truly what citizenship is about.
Absolutely.
And so history majors and engineering majors and mathematics majors and theater majors, the whole gamut, need an opportunity to learn how to do that.
Yeah, the concept of civic engagement, I think, relies most on the second part of that phrase, the engagement part. And it's tough when everything else we've got going on around us competes for our attention. But that, the watchfulness of the citizen phrase in the state capitol comes back into play, that we can't just completely assign that responsibility to others. We have to be diligent in our own choices. And that's where I think leaning on media outlets without really checking into them is comfortable and it's convenient, but doesn't always get you what you need. Assigning your own set of choices to people that you follow and that you trust, even if they don't always say what you want to say, takes time, but it's the only way to really tell you whether or not you think you're getting the full picture on things. I mean, I talk to folks on the left and folks on the right who have entirely different, not just opinions about things, but entirely different sets of facts they're working with. And I'll say to somebody, a friend on the left, well, I see that this is happening. And he's like, wait, what? because they did not, their news outlets weren't reporting that. I'll do the same thing with folks on Friends on the Right and say, well, you do know that this is happening. No, it isn't. And I'll show them the sign. They'll, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that. Because when you just live within your own echo chamber, you're not forced to confront all sides of the reality as best we can nail it down. I'm being very preachy. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
You're being very journalistic, which I appreciate.
Here we sit in a conversation. You talked about talk radio and how that kind of was a salvation period of time for AM radio when you had thoughtful people. But one of the things they had was the equipment and so forth in order to, that made them gatekeepers. But now here we sit, we're in a coffee production facility and we've got microphones and recording. We're doing a podcast and thousands of people do podcasts now that couldn't be broadcasters before. How does that mishmash of change impact you?
On the one hand, I think that the podcast revolution and the internet in general got us past a bunch of, I suppose, I don't want to say justifiable, but stereotypes that probably came about innocently in terms of what you needed to look like or sound like to be successful on the air, where there were not a lot of openings for anybody that didn't have a deep baritone voice in radio for decades and decades and decades. And if you sounded ethnic or you sounded regional in your accent or you were a tenor or a soprano, not a chance.
Good point.
Which led to a lot of incredibly good storytellers never being able to make a go. But it's the same thing that happened when sound got added to the motion picture industry. That a lot of the people who were successful in the silent film era could not be successful with the talkies because they didn't sound like what their characters looked like. Well, getting us past that and getting us to a point where you can use your real name on the air, it doesn't all have to be Bob Smith. It can be an international sounding name, or it can be a voice that is less than the tradition, not less, different than the traditional deep baritone, allows a wealth of people to be able to join the ranks of storytellers that might have been intimidated by it or wouldn't have been hired by professional companies years ago when we listened to a demo tape and made our decisions based entirely on what we heard, not what somebody was like. So podcasts from that standpoint are incredibly freeing to a generation of people that say, I've got an interesting take here, and I'd like to share that with people. The other side of the dial, though, is within a couple of years of podcasts becoming a little more mainstream, there were suddenly millions of them to choose from. And I don't know about you both, but I have a few other things to do during the day than just spend all day long listening to podcasts. Though I've taught a course in it, but I didn't have a chance to listen as much as I would like to. So the challenge is finding which one you think is of value. I think recommendations from friends are incredibly helpful there. Every time you and I get together for coffee, Randy, you've always got suggestions for me of things to read and things to listen to. I greatly value those because I value your opinion. So when someone whose opinion I value says, you got to check this out, I'll do that. But it's tough when we teach our students to do podcasts and everybody wants to do a Husker football podcast. And my first response is, fine, how are you going to differentiate it from the other 3,000 Husker podcasts out there?
Exactly.
And that becomes the challenge. Because if it's just two people sitting around yakking about their own opinions on who ought to start at quarterback, and they're not including the audience, they're just talking to themselves only, I don't know how engaging that is. It's back to that engagement part we were just talking about before. So engaging the audience, having engaging conversation and content has got to be part of it, or they simply won't last.
I'm thinking about, in the last several years, the number of times I have realized I'm saying as I'm reading about something, why did I not know this before? I mean, there are so many things from our nation's history and from the world's history. The Indian boarding schools in Nebraska. Oh yeah. The race massacre in Tulsa. For example.
I was thinking of that
it's
same
like,
thing.
How did I not know that?
Yeah.
And what you just said is that there were lots of boundaries. There were lots of gates that kept some some stories were told and some stories weren't told.
Right.
And now those boundaries are far, far less firm, and more stories are told. And so now it is, how do I know all the stories that are out there? I could find them, but how do I find them? And how do I know which stories, when I find one, how do I know that that's a well-researched story? And how do I know that it's not just the product of somebody's really fertile imagination? So it's a whole different set of questions about the stories. And I think we're richer for having access to all the stories. I just think it takes a whole different set of skills to know what to do with all of the stories.
In 2018, which was the 50th anniversary of the civil rights era, particularly that tumultuous year of 1968, there were a number of documentaries produced about the civil rights era and all the things that happened. And my wife and I watched as many of them as we could find. And many a time had that same revelation you just mentioned, where we'd look at each other and go, did you know that?
How did I not know that?
How did we not know about the Tulsa situation?
Exactly.
And we were alive during that time period. It's not like Aristotle did this. I mean, this was during our lifetime. Yes. And it was an eye-opening moment. And I think one of the benefits of that period was that it drove us to do more research and say, I need to learn more about this. And that when you would find newspaper coverage from Tulsa from that time period, it would say 2 policemen killed in the riots, no mention of the citizens who were injured or killed.
And the entire neighborhood demolished.
Right.
Yes.
So there were stories there that I'd never heard and that I thought were fascinating, but I thought at the time, was it just because I was a middle school kid at that point that they didn't want to teach us all that, or didn't think we'd be interested? Or was it something more, I don't want to say nefarious, but more intentional to keep some of those stories from reaching it? I don't know. But today, the gloves are off on all that. You can research whatever you want. But it also, to your other point, brings up the how do you know what's real and what's not? I've been seeing, because of the situation in the Middle East, I have been seeing a lot of Holocaust revisionism, and this sort of stuff going, well, there weren't 6 million Jewish people killed. It was only a couple 100,000. Like, that's only, okay, no big deal. But now things that are established science or established history are now being completely re-envisioned by people, perhaps because there were elements that were incorrect, perhaps because it's an uncomfortable narrative for them otherwise. So now that due diligence again becomes even more important, to go back and say, well, what really were those documented numbers, and how much did this vaccine really work? And yeah, it was pretty effective. I'm going to stay with the way it was the way I learned growing up. But again, I don't mind reviewing that, but there comes a point where you have to say, I'm not going to go back and reinvent the wheel on this. There's decades of science and decades of historical research that says this is the way it is. I'm going to find it hard to believe that none of us recognized before now that there was a huge flaw in this thinking. It's a challenge.
It is a challenge.
But I don't mind at least saying, okay, show me what you got. If you think there's evidence that shows that what I grew up believing is completely wrong, tell me, and I'll give it an honest review. But I'm going to review the research on the other side as well, and whichever sources I think are the most honest, that's what I'm going to have to go with. That's tough.
It is tough. There's an astonishing amount of material out there, and it takes effort and discernment to sort through it.
Right, and some of it is completely bogus.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's like just made up is what it is.
To push an agenda.
Yeah.
And so it's weeding through all that, because the tools that are available now are so much more skillful in terms of creating content that looks legitimate. And as an example of that, I'll pull up one from not that long ago when CNN and CBS got embarrassed with their story about George W. Bush attempting to evade military service, and Dan Rather put up on camera a document supposedly that showed that Bush had gotten special treatment, and somebody noticed the font that was used and said Selectric typewriters did not have that font, and debunked it within hours of when it was telecast. So now the other side of that was that happened so quick that was that all a setup? Did CBS get sold a bill of goods on this? I honestly have never seen CBS formally or CNN formally respond to where that document came from or the provenance chain they followed to make sure it was legitimate, but they got nationally embarrassed by that.
Did.
And perhaps they should have. Perhaps it was deservedly so. But I'd like to know how all that happened. But somebody was smart enough or intentional enough to even say, that's not a font. And as somebody who used to type everything on Selectrix, I get where they're coming from on that. But that's now we're so much more able to build material that looks for all the world like it's real.
Oh, yeah.
It makes it much, much, much harder.
This has been fascinating. We could go on and on and on, but anybody that's still watching or listening probably say, hey, give me a break. I guess my final question is going to be to go back to something you said about as you intake information, whether it's from a podcast or from radio, or you search it on your mobile phone or whatever. What guidance do you have for people to assure themselves that what they're seeing is indeed the truth? The
first thing I would say, and this is harder than it used to be too, but if there's actually a whole chain of things that we hand out to students to say, look at all these different things and see if what you're looking at can be verified through these steps. But the first is it a source you've heard of before? If it's Uncle Rick and Andy's good old boy yuck yuck page, maybe you don't want to rely too heavily on that. But there are scads of supposedly legitimate looking journalistic sites that I've never heard of. And my knowledge isn't infinite, but I'm a gentleman of a particular age right now. And if I've never heard of some of these sites, I'm going to be a little skeptical.
Yeah.
So my due diligence will be to go look up that site and see if anybody else knows about it. And if they will say this is a satirical site or this is a site that is not, you shouldn't even be looking at it because it's full of spamware and stuff along that line, that will make me question it. But I will second source it and just type in the premise of the article and see if anybody else is reporting that same thing. I've had this happen a few times where suddenly it'll look like a legitimate news release has popped up about a celebrity or somebody in our business who's passed away. And before I'll hit forward on that, I'll just go look it up online and say, is Randy Bretz still around? Oh, yeah, he's fine. Well, I'm not going to go post that then. No. So you'd like not to think you have to second source everything, but I think in this day and age, not biting on the first thing that you see, particularly if you're going to repost it or comment on it. I have good friends, people that have been in the business a long time, who have bid on false stories and have had to go back and retract them because they found out somebody else said, that's not true. And they'll research it and go, got me. And then they'll take it down.
Thank you so much for sharing some of your wisdom and your time and your coffee cup. And most of all, I wish you well as you herkle-durkle with your sweet wife. And I'm going to take that. I'm going to herkle-durkle with my wife.
You should. It's very enjoyable. Chance to spend time with two of my favorite people is always one of my most enjoyable things, too. And one of the things I look forward to the most in retirement is more opportunities for coffee clutch kind of discussions like this with good friends. So thank you for inviting me.
That is truly one of the gems of retirement, is having time to spend with friends.
I'm looking very forward to that.
Good thing to it.
Thanks, Marilyn. Thanks, Randy.
Rick.
You've been listening to Common Grounds, conversations from the roasting room at the Coffee Roaster in Lincoln, Nebraska. These conversations are designed to help us better understand the people who share this place and the stories that shape it. If something you heard today stayed with you, we invite you to keep the conversation going. Share the episode. Sit down with someone and talk. Thanks for being part of Common Grounds. We'll see you next time.